Hi, I'm Leela. I'm an accounting student with over 3 years' experience in the industry, and today I'm going to be discussing the ability of the deaf community to access financial and accounting services within Australia and the ways in which this could be improved. In a 2004 study, ARIMA discovered that out of a survey of deaf Australians who needed access to accounting services, 86% of them needed an interpreter, and only 46% of them were able to access one. This encouraged me to reflect on my own work experience, which led me to realize that I am yet to encounter a firm that caters to deaf clients. And so it leads me to question, why is this? And who or what can we learn from to make changes? Whether you are a business owner, a trustee, a self managed super fund owner, or just an average person, everyone has to pay tax at some point in their lives. So, why is there a lack of services for deaf people in the accounting industry? I know firsthand how important it is to be able to communicate directly and efficiently to clients, and oftentimes this will involve a direct face to face meeting. So, how can we ensure the deaf community have access to these services when we know, as I mentioned earlier, that 40% of deaf individuals who needed accounting services were unable to have an interpreter? So, knowing that there are a few services in Australia for deaf people to access accounting and finance, it leads me to question what we can do to help. In an article written by Sarah Morales, she outlines some simple communication methods that should be used in every accounting firm in order to enable clear communication between the accountant and the client. These methods include establishing what the client's preferred method of communication is. It is important to understand that not all deaf people are the same, and many have different preferences when it comes to communication. The second point she discusses is the proper etiquette when using an interpreter. For example, it is important to understand that the interpreter is not the person you are talking with, and you should not be talking to them or asking them questions about the deaf individual. The final point she makes is that the setting you choose to undertake the meeting in is very important. It should be bright and light so the deaf person can easily see you as they are relying on their sight, and the seating arrangement should be appropriate so that you can see both the client and their interpreter. I think that these points would be a helpful guideline for all local accounting firms to follow and would greatly improve the deaf community's access to accounting services in Australia. When I was researching deaf accounting services, I was alarmed at the little results I was able to find that were within Australia. However, there are quite a few services provided overseas that I believe would allow the Australian accounting industry to further improve if they follow their lead. For example, the National Disability Institute in America provides free tax and accounting services for deaf individuals. They are able to provide these services by using methods such as using symbols and pictures in handouts, nominating deaf partners to serve on committees to encourage representation, and using video messages and sign language to communicate with clients. Another service I discovered while researching was the IRS American Sign Language YouTube channel. This channel has over 80 videos explaining tax concepts and discussing issues with the use of both ASL as well as infographics. I think this is an incredible idea, and the Australian Tax Office should definitely take initiative from this and create their own videos explaining our tax laws for the Australian deaf community to watch, as this creates a simple hub where people can come and receive any information they might need regarding taxation, all communicated in Auslan. From the perspective of a deaf student, Rod Jex tells his story of being refused access to an interpreter while studying for the CPA exam. Rod believed that he was at a disadvantage because not having access to an interpreter meant that he could not have access to additional spoken lecture information, as well as not being able to participate in class discussion and ask questions. As a result of Rod's situation, a lawsuit was filed resulting in the CPA changing its policy and providing access to interpreters for deaf students, as well as establishing a scholarship fund for those students who have hearing disabilities. Upon reading this story, I decided to undertake some research into whether the Australian CA and CPA institutions offer these services to deaf students, only to discover that these services are not offered. This is definitely something that the accounting and finance industry could improve on to avoid hindering deaf students. When I began my research into accounting and finance services for deaf people in Australia, I was shocked to discover that there is little to no support for the deaf community. This has encouraged me to further my Auslan skills after completing my degree at the end of this year, and aim to provide accounting and financial services for Australia's deaf community in the future.